That was a really serious problem back then. In fact, for the next 50 years, that was the next serious problem. Indian depredations about stopped the westward settlements in Texas for the longest time, and the Texas Rangers and a few others were about all that stood between the savagery of the Indians and the civilization we were bringing. But a year of doing that, I came back to Lockhart when our enlistment was up, having to spend almost every night laying on the ground out in the prairie somewhere. And again, I got what jobs a young man could find. I worked with my hands. I was a laborer. I used a saw to split logs or to saw boards from logs to make buildings that were popping up around our new town. After a couple of years of that hard work, I got a job as a clerk in a grocery store, and in that job I got to meet lots of people coming in to buy things. And a couple of years passed, and we had a city election, and I put my name in the hat for the office of Justice of the Peace, and sure enough was elected. So my new job put me into the county courthouse many days, and I got to watch the goings-on there and got to meet people involved in the legal system. And one of the judges offered me the job of clerk of the district court. Well, I thought that sounded really good, so I accepted it, and spent the next several years inside, sitting at a table, making records while lawyers argued their cases and judges did their judging. Well, I watched these lawyers, and I thought, I can do that. So I bought me some law books, and at night I studied the law. I never went to no law school, but in 1854, I was admitted to the Texas bar and hung out my shingle and became a practicing attorney. Well, that went on until 1861, but I was also a young man in those days, in my 20s, and of course I did my court, and then I found a young lady named Mary Lee Witter, lived in Gonzales, and she accepted my proposal, and we married and set up household here in Lockhart, and she bore 4 children from our marriage, and 3 of them grew to be adults, but one poor little boy, our first, Johnny Lee, caught the fever and couldn't shake it, and at the age of 2 years and 7 days, he passed away on May the 29th, 1852. Well, Lockhart's brand new cemetery had just opened, and little Johnny was laid to rest here, and this is his tombstone that's been knocked over by vandals, but it shows he was born on May the 22nd of 50, and passed away on May the 29th of 52, 2 years and 7 days old. It broke our hearts when our first son died, and I went on to be a soldier and saw lots of men and lots of bad things in my life, but we really never got over the loss of our first son. But moving on, for the next 10 years, I practiced law in Lockhart, and then in 1861, something happened that changed our world, and you know what it was. The War for Southern Independence started. Well, I was 37 years old and was a family man, but I was also a Texas patriot and did what most men did in those days. I joined the Confederate Army. And not only did I join the Army, I helped raise a company of cavalrymen from right here in Lockhart. We became Company B of the 4th Texas Mounted Volunteers. Back then, the soldiers elected their own officers, so I was elected 2nd lieutenant of the company, and as time passed, I was promoted to 1st lieutenant and then finally promoted to captain of the company, where I led the company for the last years. So our first assignment was to go to San Antonio. We all thought we'd be sent east to join the Confederate Army and who knows where, but instead we went west to the territory of New Mexico, because there were Union soldiers in New Mexico, and some folks thought we needed to bring that vast new territory into the folds of our new nation of the Confederacy. Well, General Silby led several thousand of us west into New Mexico across 500 miles of desert. We found the Yankees in the mountains of New Mexico, and we fought 2 battles with them. I was wounded at the Battle of Val Verde, but not badly. But our expedition ended when some Yankees got behind us and found our unprotected wagon train of some 200 wagons, and what they couldn't haul off, they burned. So there we were with no ammunition, no food, only water in our canteens, no fodder for our horses, no tents, no supplies, nothing but what was on our backs and in our saddlebags. with nothing but 500 miles of Texas desert between us and San Antonio. So we limped our way back home, and when we got to San Antonio, we were reassigned to General Tom Green's Cavalry Brigade. We thought now for sure we'd be heading east to fight Yankees, but no, this time it was like being a Texas Ranger again. Our outfit was assigned the duty of patrolling the western border of Texas, again to stop marauding Indians and bandits, and this time the few Union cavalry troops that were along the border. A year of doing that, and I was ready to throw in the towel, but then we were given an assignment to join General Magruder's force because the important port city of Galveston had been taken by the Yankees. Now, Galveston was the most important city in Texas because that's where all the blockade runners came, and all the goods from Europe were unloaded and distributed from there. So the loss of Galveston was a very crippling thing. So on the night of December the 31st, New Year's Eve, all of us walked in the dark across the 2-mile-long railroad trestle, the only connection between the mainland and Galveston Island. And the train track stopped 5 miles out of town itself. We marched the 5 miles between midnight and so and dawn, and at dawn we attacked the Yankees in the city of Galveston. Now, we fought down a street they called the Strand, funny name, but I'm told it's a touristy area now. And we pushed the Yankees back onto the wharfs, and finally they surrendered and got sent off to POW camp. And then, finally, our regiment was given the orders to go with General Greene to Louisiana. We were finally going east to fight the Yankees. It seemed that they had also taken the port of New Orleans and were coming up the Red River and were intent on invading Texas from across the Sabine River on the east border of our state. And our job was to stop them. Well, we fought for almost a year in the woods of Louisiana, and it was a really hostile environment, pretty tough. Like my little boy Johnny, though, I was susceptible to fever, and I got sick, and I couldn't shake it, so I had to be released from the Army and sent in a wagon back to Lockhart, and I didn't get to finish the war. But I'll tell you, till the end of my days, folks called me Captain Nick, the title I was mighty proud of, because I had earned it. Well, back in Lockhart, since all the men were gone to war, they were in need of a district attorney for the county. Being a lawyer, they offered, and I accepted, and so I took on the job of Caldwell County's district attorney. I practiced that, or filled that office for the next couple of years, and when the Civil War ended, there was a time called Reconstruction when no Confederate veteran was allowed a public office, so I had to step away from being district attorney, and I started my law practice again and got a partner, a Mr. Story, and we resumed the practice of law. Now, Lockhart really was a bustling place and a busy place and a growing place. There were saloons all around the square. Land was being bought and sold, and there was a lot of business for an enterprising attorney. So the money started flowing in, and I would invest money in other projects. I opened a grocery store, owning it this time instead of being the clerk. I got involved, well, I bought a farm and raised crops. I raised cattle, bought and sold some land, got involved in the banking business. Without sounding too immodest, I had become a fairly prominent citizen around the city of Lockhart, and I was a content man and happy to do what I could to help the city, but I never served in public office after that stint as district attorney. But in the 1880s, when I was 60 or so years old, a problem had arisen in town that I recognized as an economic issue, and I set about trying to solve it. Now, in the 1880s, there were no paved streets in Lockhart. It was all just dirt, and dirt that turned to mud when it rained. You all live here, and you know our town sits on a sea of black gumbo soil, and when it rains, it turns into black, gooey clay. Cotton loves it because it sucks up the water and holds it like a sponge. Well, so do wagon wheels. They sink to the hub sometimes. Now, in the 1880s, Lockhart had not one but two railroad tracks that came through town. The Katy line ran east and west, and it still goes right through those trees right behind us down on the creek. And they had a nice station down behind where the old high school sits. But there was a second line, a new line that came up from San Antonio called the SAP, and it had its station right where